My parents told me, "We're giving the family business to your brother because he has a traditional family." I said, "Fine." I was the one holding all the intellectual property licenses. I revoked them the day he took over. The business became a shell overnight, and my brother is now sued by every client for breach of contract. Hey Reddit. So my parents gave our family business to my brother because apparently having a wife and 2 kids makes you more qualified to run a software company than the person who actually built all the proprietary tech. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. And now my brother is drowning in lawsuits while I'm watching from my new office downtown. Let me explain how we got here. I'm 34, and I've been working in the family business since I graduated college 12 years ago. My dad started Anderson Tech Solutions back in the late 90s as a small consulting firm helping local businesses with their IT needs. Nothing fancy, just basic network setup, computer repair, that kind of thing. By the time I joined after college, they were doing okay, but nothing special. Maybe 15 employees, revenues around $2 million annually, competing with every other small IT shop in the greater metro area. Here's the thing though. I didn't just join the company to coast on my last name. I had a degree in computer science with a focus on machine learning and data analytics. I knew the consulting game was getting crowded, and we needed to differentiate ourselves, or we'd eventually get swallowed up by bigger firms or tech companies offering the same services for cheaper. So I spent my first 2 years learning every aspect of the business while developing something on the side, something that would change everything. I created a proprietary software suite, specifically designed for mid-sized manufacturing companies. This wasn't some off-the-shelf solution you could buy anywhere. This was custom-built algorithms that could predict equipment failures, optimize production schedules, and integrate with basically any legacy system these companies were running. Manufacturing companies are notoriously behind on technology adoption. They're still running systems from the early 2000s because upgrading means shutting down production lines, retraining workers, potentially losing data. It's a nightmare. My software solved all of that. It could integrate with their ancient systems, extract and analyze data they didn't even know they were collecting, and provide actionable insights that saved them serious money. I basically lived in my condo's spare bedroom turned office for those 2 years. Weekends, evenings, anytime I wasn't actively working for the company. I'd come home from the office at 6, eat something quick, and code until midnight or later. My social life was non-existent. Dating was pretty much off the table because who wants to date a guy who cancels plans to debug algorithms? But I was building something real. I could see it coming together. The machine learning models were getting better at predictions. The integration modules were handling edge cases I hadn't even anticipated. The user interface was actually intuitive, which is rare for enterprise software. I knew this was going to work. I just needed to prove it. The first client I brought on board was almost accidental. I was doing basic IT maintenance for Henderson Manufacturing, and the plant manager was complaining about unexpected equipment breakdowns, costing them hundreds of thousands in lost production time. I mentioned I'd been working on something that might help. He was skeptical, but desperate enough to give it a shot. Within 3 months, they reduced unplanned downtime by 47%. 47%. The plant manager couldn't shut up about it. He told his buddy who ran another manufacturing company 2 states over. That guy called us. Then another. Then another. Word spreads fast in manufacturing circles when someone finds something that actually works. I remember the second client meeting vividly. The CEO walked in expecting another tech bro trying to sell him cloud solutions he didn't need. I showed him Henderson's actual data, not projections or estimates. Real numbers showing reduced downtime, cost savings, ROI calculations. His skepticism melted in about 15 minutes. By the end of the meeting, he was asking when we could start implementation. The third client came from a trade show. I'd set up a booth mostly to network and maybe generate a few leads. Instead, I ended up with a line of plant managers and operations directors wanting demos. I literally ran out of business cards. My dad was at the same trade show in a different hall, handing out brochures for basic IT services to mostly empty aisles. I had people waiting 30 minutes just to talk to me about the software. That's when I realized we had something special. This wasn't just a good product. This was solving a problem that an entire industry had been struggling with for decades. The demand was there. The solution worked. All I had to do was scale it. Over the next 4 years, I grew that side of the business from 0 to 12 million in annual revenue. We went from 15 employees to 65. We opened offices in 3 other states. My software became the main revenue driver for Anderson Tech Solutions. The old IT consulting stuff still existed, but it was maybe 20% of total revenue now. Everything else was my proprietary manufacturing optimization suite and the consulting services that came with it. And here's the critical part that becomes important later. I made damn sure every single patent, copyright, and licensing agreement for that software was in my name personally, not the company's name. Mine. My dad thought this was smart actually. He said it showed entrepreneurial thinking and that I should protect my intellectual property. He signed off on the arrangement where I licensed the software to Anderson Tech Solutions for a very favorable rate. Basically, I charged the company almost nothing to use software that was generating millions in revenue. I did this because I trusted my family. I thought we were building something together. I believed that my contributions would be recognized and rewarded appropriately. I was the technical genius behind our success, and my dad handled the business operations. It worked perfectly, or so I thought. My younger brother Jordan is 3 years younger than me. He joined the company 5 years ago after bouncing around between various sales jobs. Jordan has that classic sales guy personality. Charming, outgoing, great at golf, always knows what to say to make people feel good. He's also completely useless when it comes to anything technical. The guy can barely use Excel beyond basic formulas. My dad put Jordan in charge of business development, which basically meant taking clients to lunch and playing golf. And look, I'm not saying that stuff isn't important. Relationships matter in business. But Jordan acted like he was the reason we were successful. He'd tell people at family gatherings that he'd built relationships with key accounts. while conveniently forgetting to mention that those accounts only existed because my software solved problems they'd been struggling with for years. I watched this dynamic develop over time, and it started eating at me. Jordan would schedule a lunch with a client I'd spent 3 months implementing a complex solution for. He'd come back talking about how he'd strengthened the relationship and ensured client satisfaction. Meanwhile, I was the one who'd spent weekends debugging integration issues, who'd taken midnight calls when their systems had problems, who'd customized features to meet their specific needs. But Jordan got credit for the relationship because he was the one drinking craft cocktails with them at expensive restaurants. Never mind that the only reason they were happy enough to have those lunches was because my software was saving them millions. In Jordan's version of events, the software was just a product. He was the relationship builder, the real value add. This came to a head at one company meeting where my dad was praising Jordan for securing a major contract renewal. I pointed out that the client had literally told me the previous week they were renewing because our software was irreplaceable for their operations. Jordan got defensive and said that's because he'd built such a strong relationship that they trusted us. I asked him to explain what the software actually did for that client. He gave some vague answer about optimization and efficiency. The client was using our predictive maintenance module to prevent critical failures in their injection molding equipment. Jordan didn't even know what injection molding was. Jordan got married 6 years ago to this woman named Ashley, who came from old money. Her family owns a bunch of commercial real estate around the city. They had their first kid 3 years ago, then another one 2 years ago. Perfect little family. House in the suburbs with the white picket fence, golden retriever, membership at the country club, the whole package. Meanwhile, I'm single. I dated here and there, but nothing serious. I was focused on growing the business, improving the software, managing our technical team. I had a condo downtown, drove a practical sedan, and spent most of my free time either working or going to conferences to stay current on technology trends. Not exactly the lifestyle that screams family man. My parents, especially my mom, started making comments about this around 3 years ago. Little hints about how it would be nice to have more grandchildren. Questions about why I wasn't settling down. Comparisons between Jordan's stable family life and my bachelor lifestyle. I brushed it off because I figured it was just typical parent stuff. They want their kids to be happy and have families, whatever. But the comments got more frequent and more pointed. My mom would say things like, Jordan just seems more settled, or there's something to be said for a man who prioritizes family. My dad started talking about legacy and building something to pass down to the next generation. I still didn't really connect the dots because I was busy actually running the technical side of the business that generated 90% of our revenue. About 8 months ago, my dad asked me to have lunch with him. Just the two of us, which was unusual. We normally had weekly management meetings where we discussed business strategy, but one-on-one lunches weren't really our thing. I figured he wanted to talk about expanding into new markets, or maybe finally giving me a title that reflected my actual contributions to the company. We sat down at this steakhouse he likes, ordered food, made small talk. Then he got this serious look on his face and said, we needed to talk about succession planning. I'm thinking, great. Finally, we're going to formalize what everyone already knows. I'm the technical brains behind the company's success. I should be CEO eventually, or at minimum a named partner with significant equity. That's not where the conversation went. My dad started talking about how he's getting older, how he wants to start thinking about retirement in the next few years, how it's important that the business stays in the family. All stuff I agreed with. Then he said he'd been thinking a lot about who should take over when he steps back. I literally started to say, well, obviously, when he cut me off. He said he thought Jordan should be the one to take over as CEO and majority owner of the company. I sat there for a solid 10 seconds just processing what I'd heard. Jordan, the guy who couldn't explain what our software actually does if his life depended on it. The guy whose main contribution to the company was playing golf and taking clients to expensive dinners. That Jordan. I asked my dad if he was serious. He got defensive immediately, which told me he knew this was problematic. He started rattling off reasons. Jordan has a family to support. Jordan has shown great relationship building skills. Jordan represents the kind of stable, traditional values that clients appreciate. Jordan has been learning the business and is ready for more responsibility. I pointed out the obvious. I built the software that generates almost all our revenue. I manage the technical team. I handle all our major implementation projects. I'm the one clients actually want to talk to when they have real problems, because Jordan doesn't understand the product well enough to help them. By any objective measure, I'm more qualified to run this company. My dad got that look he gets when he's made up his mind and doesn't want to hear arguments. He said that's exactly the problem. I'm too focused on the technical side. Running a company requires people skills, relationship management, strategic thinking beyond just the product. Jordan has those skills. I'm invaluable on the technical side, and I'd obviously stay on in a senior technical role with great compensation. But leadership? That requires someone like Jordan. I asked if this had anything to do with Jordan having kids and being married. My dad hesitated, which was all the answer I needed. He eventually said that yes, Jordan's family situation did factor into his thinking. The company represents our family legacy, and Jordan has a family to pass it on to. I'm just one person. Jordan is building something bigger. I wish I could say I exploded right there in the restaurant, flipped the table, called my dad every name in the book, stormed out dramatically, but I didn't. I just sat there feeling like someone had punched me in the stomach. 12 years of work, building something from nothing, growing the company by 6 times, and I was being passed over because my brother managed to get married and reproduce. I asked what Jordan would actually own. My dad said the plan was to transfer 70% of company equity to Jordan, 20% to me, and my parents would keep 10%. Jordan would be CEO. I'd be CTO with a seat on the board, 20%, for building the entire foundation of what made the company valuable, for creating the intellectual property that generated millions, for managing 60% of the employees, 20%. I asked when this was happening. My dad said they wanted to start transitioning over the next 6 months. with Jordan officially taking over as CEO in a year. He wanted to tell me first. Then we'd announce it to Jordan, then to the company, then to clients. I finished my lunch, didn't make a scene. Told my dad I needed time to process this. He looked relieved that I wasn't fighting him on it. Probably thought I'd come around once I had time to think about how fair his plan was. I went back to my condo that night and pulled out every contract, patent filing, and licensing agreement I had for the software. I read through them carefully. Every single piece of intellectual property that made Anderson Tech Solutions profitable was licensed to the company by me personally. The licensing agreements were renewable annually. I'd always just automatically renewed them, because why wouldn't I? It was my family's company, but the agreements were clear. I owned the IP. The company licensed it from me, and I had the right to revoke those licenses with 90 days notice. I didn't make any immediate decisions. I spent the next week just watching how things worked at the office with fresh eyes. Jordan would come in around 9, spend an hour drinking coffee and catching up with people, maybe take a client call, then head out for a 2-hour lunch. He'd come back around 2, do some emails, maybe sit in on a meeting he barely contributed to, then leave by 4 to get home for dinner with the family. Meanwhile, I was in before 8, stayed until 7 or 8 most nights, handled escalations from clients, worked with our development team on product improvements, and actually kept the company running. But sure, Jordan was ready to be CEO because he could talk about golf handicaps and had mastered the art of looking busy while doing nothing. I talked to a few people outside the company, an old professor who'd become a mentor, a buddy from grad school who ran his own tech startup, a patent attorney I'd worked with on some of my filings. I laid out the situation without telling them what I was considering, just asked their thoughts. Every single one of them said the same thing. If the IP is in your name and you're being pushed out, you have leverage. Use it. Don't let family guilt trick you into giving away what you built. The announcement came 3 weeks after my lunch with Dad, family meeting at my parents' house on a Sunday. Jordan and Ashley were there with the kids. My parents sat everyone down in the living room and my dad gave this whole speech about the future of the company, about legacy, about family. Then he announced that Jordan would be taking over as CEO and majority owner. Jordan acted surprised, but in that way that told me he absolutely knew this was coming. Ashley got all teary and hugged my mom. The kids didn't care because they're like 5 and 3 years old and just wanted to know if there was dessert. Everyone looked at me like I should be excited for my brother. I congratulated Jordan, shook his hand, said all the right things. My mom pulled me aside later and thanked me for being so mature about this. She said she knew it might be hard for me, but this was the right decision for the family. Jordan needed this opportunity. I was already successful in my own right. Blah, blah, blah. I went home and drafted a letter. The letter was addressed to Anderson Tech Solutions. Attention, the CEO. I didn't even put my dad's name on it. Just CEO. Very professional, very official. The letter stated that per the licensing agreements dated various dates, I was providing 90 days notice of my intent to revoke all licenses for the proprietary software, algorithms, and associated intellectual property currently licensed to Anderson Tech Solutions. After the 90-day period, the company would no longer have rights to use, modify, or distribute any of my IP. I also included a list of what exactly this IP included. The manufacturing optimization software that generated most of our revenue. The integration tools that made it work with legacy systems. The predictive algorithms that were our main competitive advantage. The client portal that all our customers used. The reporting dashboards. Every custom module we developed for specific industries. All of it. I sent the letter via certified mail and email to the company's official business address. Carbon copied to my dad's personal email and Jordan's company email. Sent it on a Friday afternoon because I'm not a complete monster. At least they'd have the weekend to process it before clients started calling on Monday. Then I sent individual emails to each of our major clients. Very professional, very brief. Just informing them that I wanted to reach out personally to let them know about some upcoming changes. Mentioned that I would no longer be affiliated with Anderson Tech Solutions as of date 90 days out. Didn't mention the IP situation yet. Just planted the seed that something was changing. The phone call started Saturday morning. My dad called first. I sent it to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He called 6 more times before finally leaving a message. His voice was shaking. He said we needed to talk immediately. This couldn't be real. I couldn't do this to the family. Call him back now. Jordan called next. He was angry. Started yelling about how I was being petty and vindictive, and this was about me being jealous that he got the company. I let him vent for about 30 seconds then hung up. He called back immediately. I blocked his number. My mom called crying. Said I was tearing the family apart. How could I do this to my brother? To my father? They'd given me everything. This was how I repaid them? I actually answered that one. Told her very calmly that they decided to give Jordan the company. That was their choice. But the intellectual property was mine, and I got to decide what to do with it. If Jordan wanted to run a company, he could run a company. Just not one built on my work. She said I was being cruel. I said I was being fair. I'd spent 12 years building something valuable, and they decided it should belong to Jordan, because he managed to get married and have kids. That was their decision. This was mine. More calls. From my dad's attorney. From Jordan. From Ashley's father who apparently thought his money gave him a say in our family business. I ignored all of them. I'd said what I needed to say in the letter. 90 days. That's what the licensing agreement stipulated, and that's what they were getting. Monday morning I got to the office early. Most of the technical team reported directly to me anyway. I called a meeting with all of them. Told them straight up what was happening. I was leaving in 90 days. The IP was mine, not the company's. I'd be starting my own firm, and I wanted to know who was interested in coming with me. Out of the 28 people on the technical team, 24 said yes immediately. The other 4 wanted to think about it, which was fair. These were people with families, mortgages, lives. I told them I understood, and they should do what's best for them. but I'd be offering competitive salaries, better benefits, and actual equity in the new company. Not 20% while doing 80% of the work. Real equity. My dad showed up at the office around 10, stormed into my office without knocking, started yelling about how I was destroying everything he'd built. I let him finish, then very calmly pointed out that he'd built a small IT consulting firm that was struggling to compete. I'd built the software platform that made us profitable. There was a difference. He said the company would sue me. I smiled and asked him to please do that. I'd enjoy explaining in court how he'd signed contracts giving me full ownership of the IP, how I'd licensed it to the company as a favor, and how those licenses were always intended to be terminable. I'd also enjoy discovery where we'd look at what percentage of company revenue came from my IP versus Jordan's golf games. He said I'd never work in this industry again. He'd make sure of it. I laughed at that. Told him that every single one of our major clients had my personal contact information. They knew who actually solved their problems. They knew who built the software they depended on. If he wanted to test whether they were more loyal to the Anderson family name or to the person who saved them millions of dollars annually, we could run that experiment. Jordan tried a different approach. Came to my condo that evening. Showed up with flowers and this whole speech prepared about how we were brothers, how family was more important than business, how we could work this out. I told him he was right. Family is important. That's why it hurt so much when Dad decided his family was more valuable than mine, just because he'd gotten married. Jordan said it wasn't like that. I was still family. I'd still have a role in the company. I cut him off and told him to stop. The decision was made. I was leaving. The IP was coming with me. He could run whatever was left, which would be a basic IT consulting firm competing with 1,000 other companies offering the same services. He got angry then. Said I was being selfish. That I was hurting Mom and Dad. That I was damaging his kid's future. I asked him if he'd considered any of that when he accepted a company built on my work. When he was okay with getting 70% equity for doing 20% of the value creation. Somehow he didn't have answers for that. The 90 days moved fast. I set up my new company. Filed all the paperwork. Leased office space in a better part of downtown. Hired the technical team members who decided to come with me, which ended up being all 28 of them once I shared the full equity and compensation structure. Started reaching out to clients to let them know about the transition. Setting up the new company was almost therapeutic. I finally got to build something exactly the way I wanted. No compromises. No family politics. Just pure business decisions based on what made sense. I structured the equity so that key team members got real ownership, not token shares. I set up a flat management structure where good ideas mattered more than tenure. I created a culture where technical excellence was valued as much as business development. The office space I leased was in a renovated industrial building. High ceilings, exposed brick, huge windows. The kind of space that tech companies use to attract talent. I set up proper workstations for the development team. A real server room with actual cooling and backup systems instead of the cobbled together setup we'd had at Anderson Tech. Conference rooms with good video equipment for client calls. A kitchen that wasn't just an ancient coffee maker and a mini fridge. My team was pumped. They'd been working in Anderson Tech's cramped offices with outdated equipment and no room to grow. Now they had space, resources, and actual career paths. Several of them told me they'd been thinking about leaving anyway. The only reason they'd stayed was loyalty to me personally, not to the company. The client conversations were interesting. I approached each one individually, usually over video calls, since many were in different states. I'd explain that I was starting my own firm, that the entire technical team was coming with me, and that we'd be offering the same software and service they were currently receiving. Same or better quality. Similar pricing. More direct access to the technical team since we'd be smaller and more focused. Most of them were relieved honestly. They'd been hearing rumors about changes at Anderson Tech. Some had noticed that Jordan was now more involved in their accounts, and were concerned because he clearly didn't understand their technical needs. When I offered them continuity with the people who actually knew their systems and had built their solutions, it was an easy decision. Here's where it got interesting. Our licensing agreements with clients were tied to Anderson Tech Solutions as a company, but the implementation and service agreements referenced the specific software and technical team. When I offered clients the option to transition their contracts to my new company with the same software, same team, and same service level. At similar pricing, most of them jumped at it. Not all of them. Some had loyalty to my dad or felt weird about the family drama. But about 70% of our client base decided to move their contracts to my new firm. They were getting the same thing they'd been getting, just with a different company name on the invoice. Anderson Tech Solutions tried to sue them for breach of contract. That went nowhere because the client's attorneys pointed out that the contracts guaranteed access to specific software and specific service levels. When Anderson Tech could no longer provide that software or service, because I owned the IP and I'd taken the technical team, the clients had grounds to terminate for non-performance. My dad tried to hire new developers to recreate the software. That's technically legal since you can't copyright ideas, only specific implementation. But here's the thing about complex enterprise software. It's not just about writing code. It's about understanding the specific problems you're solving, the edge cases, the integration challenges. It's about years of iterative improvements based on real-world usage. They hired a development team, spent 6 months trying to build something comparable. What they produced was basically a worse version of what I'd built 5 years earlier. It crashed constantly. It couldn't handle the same data volumes. It was missing critical features. Clients who'd stayed with Anderson Tech started calling them asking when the software would work properly again. I heard through the grapevine what was happening over there. The new development team my dad hired didn't understand manufacturing processes. They were good coders, but they'd never worked in industrial settings. They didn't know why certain features mattered, or how the software was actually being used day to day. They were building based on spec documents Jordan tried to write, which was like asking someone who'd never driven a car to design an engine. One client told me directly what happened. Anderson Tech deployed an update to their hastily rebuilt software that crashed their entire production monitoring system. took down 3 production lines for 6 hours, cost them over $200,000 in lost production. When the client called Jordan demanding to know what happened, he couldn't explain the technical issue. He literally put one of the new developers on the phone, who admitted they were still working out some bugs. Some bugs. They deployed untested code to a production environment at a manufacturing facility. That's not bugs, that's malpractice. Another client had their data corrupted by the new system. Years of production data, quality metrics, maintenance records. Just gone. The backup systems didn't work properly because the new developers hadn't implemented them correctly. The client lost data they needed for regulatory compliance in their industry. That's the kind of thing that gets companies shut down by regulators. Jordan, as CEO, started making promises he couldn't keep, told clients the new version would be ready soon, told them it would be better than what they'd had before, signed contracts guaranteeing specific performance metrics that his development team had no chance of hitting. That's when the lawsuit started. Manufacturing companies don't mess around. When you promise them software that will reduce downtime and optimize production, then deliver something that crashes and costs them money and lost productivity, they sue. Especially when they have contracts with specific performance guarantees that you're not meeting. First lawsuit came from Henderson Manufacturing, ironically the first client I'd ever brought on board. They sued for breach of contract, seeking damages for lost productivity and the cost of having to implement a different solution. They calculated their damages at just over $3 million. Then Norton Industries filed. They were seeking $4.2 million. Then Cascade Manufacturing, $6.8 million. Within 6 months of Jordan officially taking over as CEO, Anderson Tech Solutions was facing 14 separate lawsuits, totaling just over $40 million in claimed damages. The company's entire annual revenue before I left had been around $12 million. They were being sued for more than 3 times their annual revenue. Jordan tried to blame me in the legal filings. Said I'd sabotaged the company, that I'd acted in bad faith, that I'd stolen clients. His attorneys actually tried to argue that my licensing agreements were invalid because of some family law technicality. That lasted exactly 1 hearing before the judge told them to come back with actual legal arguments instead of feelings. Insurance didn't cover most of it, because Jordan had made fraudulent claims about the software capabilities that voided coverage. The company had maybe $2 million in liquid assets. Even if they sold everything, they couldn't come close to covering the lawsuit exposure. 3 months into the lawsuit nightmare, my dad showed up at my new office. Didn't call ahead. Just walked into the reception area and asked to see me. My assistant buzzed me and I almost said no. But curiosity won. He looked like he'd aged 5 years and 8 months. Sat down across from my desk without being invited. Started talking about how we needed to work together to fix this. How it was still a family business and family helps family. How Jordan was in over his head and needed my help. I asked him what he was offering. He said if I came back, we could restructure. Give me more equity, maybe 40% instead of 20. Co-CEOs with Jordan. We'd figure it out together. I laughed. Told him he was still missing the point. I didn't want equity in a failing company being sued into oblivion. I had my own company now. One that didn't have 40 million in lawsuit exposure. One where I owned the IP instead of licensing it. One where I didn't have to share credit with someone who couldn't even explain what the product did. He got angry then. Said I was being vindictive. That I'd destroyed his life's work out of spite. That he'd given me everything. And this was how I repaid him. I pulled up the original emails from 18 months ago on my screen. Turned the monitor so he could see them. The ones where he explained that Jordan deserved to be CEO because of his traditional family and leadership qualities. Where he said I was invaluable on the technical side, but not leadership material. Where he offered me 20% equity for building the entire foundation of the company's value. Asked him if he'd have made the same decision, if he could do it over. If he still thought Jordan's wife and kids made him more qualified than me. If he still thought 20% was fair. He didn't answer. Just stood up and walked out. That was 4 months ago. Haven't heard from him since. Jordan's situation got worse. 2 of the lawsuits went to trial because he refused to settle. Bad move. Juries don't like tech CEOs who promise things they can't deliver and then blame everyone else when it goes wrong. First verdict came back against Anderson Tech for the full amount plus punitive damages. $8.4 million total. Second trial lasted 3 days. The plaintiff's attorney brought in their former plant manager to testify about how Anderson Tech's software failure had cascaded into a safety incident. No one got hurt, but they'd had to shut down an entire facility for emergency inspections. That jury awarded them $12 million. The bankruptcy filing came 2 weeks later. Chapter 7, not even Chapter 11. There was nothing to reorganize. The company was a shell. No IP, no technical team, no viable product, and more debt than assets. The filing listed my dad and Jordan as primary creditors because they'd been personally guaranteeing some of the company debt. They stood to lose their houses. My mom called me after the filing. First time we'd spoken in over a year. She was crying. Said they were going to lose everything. That they needed help. That surely I had enough success now that I could help my family. I asked her if she remembered telling me I was being dramatic when I pointed out the favoritism growing up. If she remembered saying Jordan deserved the Tesla more because college was harder for him. If she remembered calling me selfish for not paying for his drunk driving accident. She said that was different. That was in the past. This was about helping family in crisis. I told her the number to my business line and said if they wanted to hire my consulting firm, my rates were $200 an hour with a $10,000 retainer. Then I hung up. Jordan tried one more approach. Showed up at my condo building and convinced the doorman to let him up. Knocked on my door at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. When I opened it, he looked wrecked. Hadn't shaved in days. Clothes looked slept in. He asked if we could talk. I let him in. He sat on my couch and started explaining how bad things were. The lawsuits, the bankruptcy. Ashley had taken the kids to her parents' house because they were going to lose their home. He couldn't find another job because his entire CEO tenure was a publicly documented disaster. He was applying to sales positions and getting rejected. Then he asked if there was any way I'd consider hiring him. Not in management, just sales. He'd work his way back up. He just needed a chance. I asked him if he understood why he was in this position. Really understood. Not the surface level stuff about the software being gone, but the actual reasons. He said he knew he wasn't as technical as me, that he should have listened when I tried to explain how the software worked, that he'd relied too much on the development team Dad hired, and they weren't as good as mine. I told him he still didn't get it. The problem wasn't that he wasn't technical. The problem was, he took something he didn't build, didn't understand, and couldn't maintain, then acted like he deserved it more than the person who created it. He made promises he couldn't keep because he didn't understand what he was promising. He blamed others for his failures instead of admitting he was unqualified for the job. He sat there for a minute, then asked if that was a no on the job. I said yeah, that was a no. I needed people who brought value, not people who needed jobs because they destroyed their last company through incompetence. He left. I heard through mutual industry contacts that he ended up taking a job at a call center doing outbound sales for business insurance, making about $40,000 a year. His wife divorced him 6 months later, took the kids and moved back to her parents' estate. He's living in a studio apartment and driving a 10-year-old sedan. My dad lost the house. He and my mom moved into a small condo in a retirement community. He had to dip into his retirement accounts to settle some of the personal guarantees on company debt. He's doing part-time consulting now, trying to rebuild savings, mostly for companies that don't know about the Anderson Tech disaster. Meanwhile, my company crossed $30 million in revenue last year. We've expanded into 2 new product verticals. I've got 80 employees now. We're being approached by private equity firms interested in buying a stake, but I'm not selling. Why would I give up control of something I built? Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.